So let me tell you a story. It's about the very first battle in history that was recorded in reliable, nitty-gritty detail. It's a wild tale of genius strategy, a gamble that could have gone horribly wrong, and consequences that are still echoing today. And we know all of it thanks to one very diligent ancient Egyptian scribe.
This is the big question, right? And it's the exact problem that was staring one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, Thutmose III, right in the face. A massive army of rebellious kings had gathered to take him on, and they knew he was on his way. The fate of his new reign, maybe even Egypt itself, really hinged on the answer to this one single question.
And it all came down to this moment, this one choice. When Thutmose and his army got to the Carmel mountain range, they were faced with three ways to get to the enemy who were holed up in the fortress city of Megiddo. There was a northern road, a southern road, and this one insane, treacherous path that went right through the middle. Now, his generals were all on the same page. They practically begged him, take the safe routes. And you can see why. The northern and southern paths, wide, secure, predictable. But that central path, the one through the Aruna Pass, well, that was a death trap. It was a super narrow ravine where his entire army would have to march single file, making them sitting ducks for an ambush. It was the one path no sane commander would ever choose. So to really get why Thutmose was even thinking about this incredible gamble, we need to zoom out and look at the political firestorm he was marching straight into. Okay, so picture this. It's 1457 BC. Egypt's grip on the Levant, that's the whole eastern Mediterranean region, it's starting to slip. A bunch of powerful Canaanite kings, led by the ruler of Kadesh, decide this is their moment. They team up with some rival kingdoms and decide to just throw off Egyptian rule entirely. Well, Thutmose III, who's brand new to the throne, was not about to let that happen. This was his very first military campaign, and he decided to lead it himself to send a message, a big one.
And you gotta admit, the rebels picked a really smart spot for their headquarters. This is Megiddo. For thousands of years, this mound, or tell as it's called, was one of the most vital pieces of real estate in the ancient world. And the reason why is simple: location, location, location.
You see, Megiddo was parked right on top of what they called the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea. This thing was the super highway of antiquity. It was the main route for all the trade, all the armies, everything moving between the two great cradles of civilization, Egypt and Mesopotamia. So if you controlled Megiddo, you controlled the flow of money and military power for the entire region. Simple as that.
So here he is, faced with these three paths. His generals are pleading with him to play it safe. And what does Thutmose do? He makes his decision. He declares, "My Majesty will proceed upon this Aruna road." His thinking was just brilliant psychological warfare. He figured if his own commanders thought it was a suicidal idea, then the enemy would never in a million years expect him to actually do it.
All right, so this brings us to the actual military maneuver that would make this battle legendary. This was a total masterpiece of calculated risk and getting inside your enemy's head. Thutmose's logic was pretty simple. Always do what your enemy least expects. He led his army right into that narrow pass, a place so tight they literally had to go one by one, chariot after chariot, soldier after soldier. The risk was just immense. I mean, if the enemy was waiting for them, the Egyptian army could have been picked off piece by piece. So to show everyone he meant business, Thutmose himself led the column, right from the very front. And guess what? The gamble paid off. Big time. Just like Thutmose predicted, the king of Kadesh had put all his main forces at the exits of the two safe roads. He'd only left a tiny handful of guards at the end of the Aruna Pass, because, who would be dumb enough to use it? Well, Thutmose's army just brushed them aside and poured out into the valley, completely surprising everyone. So now they're out in the open, and the enemy is scattered and totally shocked. Thutmose does not waste a second. He arranges his army in this brilliant concave formation, basically a giant crescent shape that curves inwards. So when the Canaanites finally scrambled to get into a battle line, this shape meant the Egyptians could attack both of their flanks at the exact same time. It was like a giant pincer move waiting to happen. The result? Well, it was an absolute slaughter. The Egyptian attack, with the pharaoh leading the charge from the center, just smashed into the unprepared rebel army. They killed 8,300 Canaanite soldiers. And get this, that isn't just a number. It's the first recorded body count in the history of warfare. The battle itself was a swift, crushing victory. But right there, in that moment of triumph, a critical mistake was made, one that would turn what should have been a one-day fight into a 7-month ordeal.
The Canaanite line didn't just break, it disintegrated. The survivors, completely panicked, turned and ran for the only place they thought they'd be safe, behind the massive walls of Megiddo. Thutmose had them on the run. He had a clear shot to chase down the fleeing kings and take the city right then and there. But his army, his victorious soldiers, they broke discipline. Instead of finishing the job, they stopped to loot the enemy camp, which was just filled with gold and silver and all these fancy chariots.
And that moment of greed, it cost them. That short delay was just enough time for the people on the walls of Megiddo to start lowering ropes made of tied-together clothes and haul the fleeing kings of Kadesh and Megiddo up over the walls to safety. The chance for a quick, total victory was gone. Still, even with that missed opportunity, the loot was incredible. Just look at this list. The Egyptians captured over 900 chariots, more than 2,000 horses, and tons of armor and bows. This gives you a real sense of just how big the rebel army was and how wealthy these cities were. Now, you might be wondering, how in the world do we know all this stuff? The strategy meetings, the body counts, the exact lists of plunder. It's all because Thutmose's personal scribe, a guy named Jenny, kept a daily journal of the whole thing. And, years later, Thutmose had that entire journal carved, for all time, into the stone walls of the great temple at Karnak.
So after a grueling 7-month siege, the city was finally starved into surrender. The victory was complete, but the true impact of Megiddo would ripple out across centuries, forging an empire and even shaping the very words we use today.
So why does this one battle from so long ago matter so much? Well, first, it restamped Egypt's authority on the region with terrifying force. Thutmose III would go on to lead almost 20 campaigns, creating the biggest empire Egypt had ever seen. And he started this really clever policy of forcing the defeated kings to send their sons to Egypt to be raised and educated. It was a brilliant way to make sure the next generation of rulers would be loyal to him. But the most astonishing legacy of all is a single word. A word you definitely know. Megiddo became so famous as a place for huge, world-changing battles that its name in Hebrew, Har Megiddo, which means Mount of Megiddo, eventually made its way into the Bible's book of Revelation as the place for the final apocalyptic battle at the end of the world, Armageddon. And that just leaves you thinking, right? A single decision made by a pharaoh 3,500 years ago not only built an empire, but gave us a word for the end of everything. It really makes you wonder what other incredible stories from the ancient world are hiding in plain sight, in the very words we use every single day.